Hello, everybody. I have a super exciting episode for you today about the law. Um, One of my love languages is good governance, as you might expect from somebody who, believes in paying taxes, and the other side of that, which is the government that taxes fund. And I think what's really important to have a functional system is one, fair tax laws, two, fair tax collection, and three, good government, which is, of course, enforced and elected by us, the people. That is what the demos in democracy means, right? So, just in that spirit of democracy and in a spirit of, honestly, of celebration, because we have an administration right now, the Biden administration. I know people are feeling really down on it because of the situation in the Middle East. And of course, I understand that. But I do want to say that the Biden administration has been doing a lot for good government. And I want to be really fair and even-handed and talk about something really good that has been happening. um, the Federal Trade Commission has been really enforcing stuff. Lina Khan, if you are not aware of her, she is this powerhouse, badass woman who went to Yale Law School, and she has been heading up the FTC. She is only 35 years old, but she is brilliant, and she is really like David and Goliath, going after going after enforcing laws that actually exist in our country, but that a lot of companies have just treated like they can steamroll and have successfully steamrolled. And if you want to know how much those companies are thinking about Lina Khan and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, I encourage you to listen to a recent episode that Jon Stewart did on the Daily Show podcast with Lina Khan. I don't know if you heard that a while back, Jon Stewart had a deal with Apple or Apple Podcasts, Apple TV. I'm not quite sure the details. Um, and he was going to have a show there. And one of the guests he wanted to have on was Lina Khan. And Apple wouldn't allow it. And so Jon Stewart canceled the deal. Um, so, we think of Apple as the good guys. I think sometimes they make very nice products, but, they're into monopolies too. And Lina Khan has sued them and Amazon and Facebook. And, um, if you're a person who cares about good government, if you sigh and get upset when the right thing is not done, I think it's important to celebrate when the right thing does get done. So what I want to talk about today is the new ban on non-competes. Um, it's really exciting. And I I heard the news when this came down, but honestly, it didn't really hit me until I did an interview on this wonderful podcast called Windowsill Chats with a client of mine, a woman who's in my program, Money Bootcamp, Margot Tantow. It was a delightful conversation. We talked about retirement and investing, but this news had just come down about the new FTC ban on non-compete agreements. And I knew that that had happened, but I actually was not aware of how widespread non-compete agreements were among creative people, among people like you, dear listener. And Margot was telling me that she herself has been subject to many non-competes, and has many, many friends in creative industries who have also been subject to them. So it was that moment where the wheels really started turning for me. And I was like, oh, okay, this really does affect my community. I should do an episode on this. So here it is, my episode on the FTC ban on non-compete agreements for you. Now, a disclaimer, of course, I want to make is this is not a tax law. Of course, I do study tax laws when they come down. I want to give you the best information I can. I am not a lawyer, and this one does not involve taxes at all. It involves contracts. And so I just want to give that disclaimer. I have read a lot of articles. I have fact checked. I generally feel good about this episode, but I want to encourage you, if you have any further questions, to reach out to a great lawyer, a great attorney, for details, especially if you have your own contracts, whether they're for employees or contractors that you have people sign, you may want to get them checked out and make sure that they're compliant. But I will give you a little tip and some FTC language that you can send to anybody who you've had sign an agreement to get you into safe harbor compliance with the new ban. Okay. All right. So let's jump right in. So the FTC is the Federal Trade Commission. It is a part of the US government that is there to protect the public from unsafe business practices, including monopoly power. I think we have a lot of structures in our government that work in theory that work really well, but a way when a political party or, when there's regulatory capture and somebody doesn't want that type of law to be enforced, they might encourage the government to not fund that branch, right? So government funding, and yes, your tax dollars matter here. Funding these parts of the government really matter in the ability to have these laws enforced. I just kind of want to connect the dots on how taxes play a role in this stuff. So the Biden administration has put some actual funding behind the Federal Trade Commission, which is a change from the Trump administration that preceded. And I think it's a really good thing. And they also hired Lina Khan. I will link to the Lina Khan Jon Stewart interview. First of all, it's funny. But second of all, Lina Khan is such a freaking badass. Also, Jon Stewart is a hell of a badass to walk away from a pretty big deal because he wasn't allowed by his potential employer to talk to Lina Khan. So it's pretty interesting. So I'll link to that in the show notes. So the FTC exists to protect the public from unsafe business practices. Okay. And the FTC has, put out this report. It's really long. And they say that non-compete bans suppress wages and restrict the freedom of workers, and they suppress entrepreneurship. They stifle new businesses. Non-competes are really widespread in this economy. Until I started doing the research for this episode, I had no idea how widespread they were. They affect 1 in 5 American workers, about 30 million people. That's a lot. That's a huge portion of this economy. And ending non-competes is expected to raise wages in the US by about $300 billion. That's billion with a B, $300 billion. So it is effectively going to increase wages. What's really interesting, because there's going to be some lawsuits, there is already some pushback against this, but what's interesting is that the studies are very, very clear that non-competes are bad, and that also a lot of the effect of banning non-competes is really positive throughout the economy on multiple fronts. And we are able to know this because there are a couple natural experiments that have happened. For example, and I will link in the show notes to the New Yorker article where I found this information. There's a researcher who looked at this and wrote some papers. I'm blanking on the name, but I will link so you can go find that. But in Oregon, in 2008, Oregon banned non-compete agreements. And so we're able to study what happened in Oregon versus other states, which is, that's a natural experiment. This is what economists look for to study things like this. So what they found is that worker mobility rose. In other words, workers were able to move to better fit jobs. This is actually what economics says that it wants, right? You want to be able to move to where your skills are the most highly valued and where you're the most satisfied and happy as a worker. So worker mobility rose. Wages in Oregon after the ban rose immediately 2 to 3%. And within the first year, they rose 5%. So really, these non-compete agreements really had been suppressing wages, and wages went up as soon as the non-competes went into effect. The non-compete ban went into effect. It's also interesting to notice, there's an argument out there that non-competes are going to that they're important for, that employers want to have non-competes for innovation and trade secrets. The thing is, though, non-compete agreements just stop workers from going to better fit places, stop them from starting their own competitive business. They really suppress competition in the economy. And if you leave an organization and go try to hire people, but they're all affected by non-competes and they can't come work for you, it suppresses innovation. It suppresses entrepreneurship. But the thing is, there's still intellectual property provisions in contracts that are enforceable. So you're still not allowed to steal trade secrets or intellectual property. And so that's really not the issue here, right? We're really talking about worker mobility. So these are issues that need to be carefully separated. Okay. So but another really good example is, California, the home of Silicon Valley, the home of, the huge tech giants. Well, California banned non-competes in 1872. And so what's interesting is a lot of companies in California still tell their workers that they are subject to non-competes, but the courts in California have not and will not enforce non-compete agreements and haven't since 1872. So it's interesting. The companies often give an impression, might be giving the workers an impression that they're subject to a non-compete, but they're not. And the fact that they have not been enforceable since 1872, it did not stop Silicon Valley from forming. Okay, so just an interesting data point. All right. But a lot of workers really did not know that they were even, and now I'm talking about nationwide, and this 1/5 of all workers who are subject to non-compete agreements, a lot of people never knew they were subject to these non-compete agreements until they got sued by a former employer. And one of the reasons that this issue really came to light, there was not that much protest against them. There was not that much advocacy to, trying to get the FTC to ban non-compete agreements. But this issue really became a big deal during COVID because a huge number of healthcare workers are affected by non-compete agreements. And you can imagine how awful this is when a hospital, an area needs nurses, for example, or healthcare technicians, and cannot hire them because those people cannot take a job with a competitive hospital, right? So this really became a huge issue and created staffing shortages when hospitals were trying to hire and couldn't because all these healthcare workers were subject to non-compete agreements. So there is like a comment period. And again, I'm not, a legal scholar or a lawyer, but the FTC had to, as part of the political process, they had to open up the proposal for a non-compete ban to public comment. And there were, and this is in the FTC report, there were 26,000 comments. 25,000 of those 26,000 comments supported a ban on non-competes. So I think the public has spoken. The public was officially given its chance to speak, and it has spoken. So here's what the law actually says. Senior executives are still allowed to be subject to non-compete agreements. And this feels to me pretty fair. If you are at the highest level of an organization in the operations, it makes a little more sense that you should be under more scrutiny and more ability to be restricted by a non-compete agreement. So if you are an executive at an organization making a salary, making, over $150,000 per year, this ban on non-competes may not affect you. You may still be bound by your non-compete agreement. But for everyone else, here's what the law now says. You cannot be asked to sign a new non-compete agreement. You cannot enter into a new non-compete agreement. And an employer cannot represent to a worker that they are bound by a non-compete agreement. In other words, you can't, even though there is not actually any language in the contract saying there is a non-compete, you can't act like there is one, right? That is also part of this law. That's part of the ban, okay? Another really interesting point in the law here is that it says worker It does not say employee. And this is very important because what is explicitly included in this non-compete ban is people like us, self-employed people, contractors, interns, externs, volunteers are all subject to this new ban on non-competes, which is a wonderful thing. I didn't even know until I started reading articles about this, but volunteers at some organizations have been asked to sign non-competes. Can you imagine trying to tell volunteers they can't go volunteer for another organization? Somebody who's interested in soup kitchens can't go volunteer at another soup kitchen? How ridiculous. Anyway, so it's really interesting that it says worker, not employer, not employee, because it actually includes interns, it includes contractors, it includes volunteers, and apprentices. Okay. You should be aware that states already, there are multiple states that already have bans on non-competes. And those, of course, those laws vary by state. So it's important to also note that you may already have be subject to a ban on non-compete agreements, depending on what state you're in. Oregon, Hawaii, California, there's quite a number of them. But this now stacks with a federal law because of the FTC. And then the last thing I want to tell you about is what to do. So you should understand that this law is not quite in effect. I believe it goes into effect 120 days after the announcement was made. So there's a little bit of time. And if you have had any workers of your own sign agreements with you, contractors, employers, etc., you may have some work to do. You probably want to go check your contract that you gave to those workers. Make sure there is not a non-compete clause in there. You might want to go bring that to your own lawyer. But also, and I will include this link in the show notes, the FTC provided a section called model notices. And if you send a letter, to your worker, former worker, current worker, and you include this exact language that I'll link to in the show notes from the FTC, you will be covered under what is called a safe harbor, meaning you will not be in trouble with the law, right? So you can get compliant with the law without consulting a lawyer by just taking this language and notifying any former employees or workers that you had, okay? So that's where I want to leave it for you now. I hope that this episode has helped you understand the new FTC ban on non-compete agreements. I think it's a really wonderful thing. I think it's going to help entrepreneurship, competition, worker happiness, and it's going to help increase wages. I don't think any hairdresser out there should have to be subject to a non-compete agreement, or any volunteer trying to do work at an animal shelter, right? It just seems ridiculous. And so this is an example to me of really good government, really positive movement. And I want to be here to celebrate that. I think it's awesome. So check the show notes today for that amazing Lina Khan, Jon Stewart interview, for that FTC language, for some of the research, the deeper research in the New Yorker article that I sourced some of this from. And share this episode with a friend if you know that you have a friend who has ever signed a non-compete agreement, or maybe had a worker sign a non-compete agreement. You might want to share it with them. And let me know if you want to send me a message on Instagram. I'm at Sunlight Tax. Let me know if you've ever been subject to a non-compete agreement, if you are going to be affected by this new non-compete ban. I'm really interested to know. I had taken for granted that this wasn't a big deal for creative workers, and I found myself to be completely wrong. Apparently, it really has been affecting a lot of people in creative industries. So let me know if you're one of them. I would love to know. All right. Enjoy the episode. Enjoy your day, and I will see you next week. Bye. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, be sure to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. I'm so grateful for that. This video is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links I reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.